The moment I pressed my hand against the empty shelf inside my safe, I already knew who had done it. Not suspected. Knew. 38 years as a chartered professional accountant had trained me to read patterns the way other people read faces. The numbers never lied. People always did. My retirement savings, $220,000 in cash I had withdrawn to close a private land deal the following Monday, were gone. So were my late wife's jewelry pieces, the ones I hadn't been able to bring myself to put back in a bank vault because keeping them nearby was the closest thing I had left to her. 3 days after I discovered the theft, my son-in-law reversed a brand new black Ford F-150 Lariat into his parking space at the house next to mine. The one I'd helped my daughter and him purchase 4 years ago by covering their down payment. The truck had chrome running boards and a spray-in liner. It still had the dealer's paper plates. My daughter leaned out the passenger window and waved at me like a child showing off a birthday present. 6 weeks after that, my phone rang at 9:30 on a Tuesday evening. My son-in-law was on the line. I could hear him struggling to breathe between words. "What have you done?" he kept saying. "What have you done to us?" I told him that I'd done nothing to them. I'd simply allowed the truth to do what truth always does when you stop running from it. Then I ended the call. Before we go further, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are right now. I had driven up to Muskoka for a long weekend at the end of September. Leaves were turning, the lake was quiet, and I needed the distance from the city that Oakville sometimes fails to provide when your daughter and her husband live 40 feet from your back door. I was gone from Friday afternoon until Monday morning. The plan had been simple. Return Monday, finalize the paperwork on a private property purchase in Halton Hills with a seller who preferred cash, and close the transaction before the end of the fiscal quarter. The cash had been sitting in my safe for 11 days. I had withdrawn it in 2 tranches from my investment account, each transfer documented, receipts filed, everything above board the way I had done professionally for 4 decades. When I pushed open my front door Monday morning, nothing looked disturbed. The house smelled the same. The alarm had not been triggered. I set down my bag and walked directly to the study, the way I always did when returning from any trip longer than a day, because the study was where I kept everything that mattered. The safe was a Browning model, bolted to the floor behind a section of built-in shelving. I had shown my daughter the combination 3 years ago after my heart procedure, so that if something happened to me suddenly, she could access the documents inside. I had never thought to question whether showing her had also meant showing him. The door swung open. The shelf was bare. I stood there for what felt like a long time. The coffee I had made was still steaming on the corner of my desk. I looked at it, and then looked back at the empty shelf and understood, with the particular clarity that comes from decades of untangling other people's financial disasters, exactly what had happened, and exactly what it meant. I called the Halton Regional Police non-emergency line. 2 officers arrived within the hour. They were professional and thorough, but the older of the 2, a constable who had the look of someone who had worked break-and-enters for 20 years, examined the safe with the quiet resignation of a man who already knew what the report would say. No forced entry, no scratches on the lock mechanism, no sign of a stranger anywhere in the house. He asked me who had access. I told him. I watched his posture shift almost imperceptibly when I gave the 2 names. My daughter and my son-in-law arrived at the front door about 40 minutes into the interview. My daughter breathless and wide-eyed, my son-in-law standing slightly behind her with his hands jammed into the front pocket of his hoodie. He said the right things. He said them quickly and with the particular overemphasis of someone who had rehearsed. When the constable asked him about the safe combination, he shook his head and held his palms out. He'd never needed to use it, he said. Didn't even know where it was. Really. He said really one more time than necessary. My daughter held my arm and told the constable that her father was the most trusting person she had ever known. I noticed she did not ask what had been taken. I noticed that she had not asked that since the moment she walked in. After the officers left with their file numbers and their careful non-promises about follow-up, my daughter squeezed my hand and said she was so sorry, that this was awful, that they would do whatever they could to help. My son-in-law patted my shoulder from behind, a gesture that lasted exactly 1 second. Then they went back through the side gate to their house. I sat at my desk and opened a fresh spreadsheet on my laptop. I typed the date at the top, 38 years of professional habit. When you don't know yet what you're documenting, you start with what you know for certain, and you build outward. I knew the cash was gone. I knew the jewelry was gone. I knew my son-in-law had been alone in my house on the Saturday. I had a text from my daughter sent that afternoon saying she was in Mississauga visiting a friend and would be back by dinner. I knew the combination to my safe had been written in a small notebook I kept in my desk drawer, which I had stopped doing after the heart procedure because I had taught the combination to my daughter directly. I knew that notebook was also gone. I didn't sleep. By morning, I had 4 pages of notes. The police were honest with me at the follow-up call 4 days later. Without physical evidence of an external break-in and without a recording or confession, building a criminal case against family members who had lawful access to the property was, in the constable's careful words, extremely difficult. He did not say impossible, but the pause before extremely told me everything I needed to know about how they would allocate their time. I had spent 38 years explaining to clients that understanding something and proving it were 2 entirely different professional standards. I had said those exact words perhaps 1,000 times. Now they applied to me. I closed the police file in my own mind and opened a new one. My neighbor across the street walked over that Thursday while I was bringing in the recycling bins. We had lived on the same block for 16 years. He mentioned, in the easy way of someone passing along pleasant neighborhood news, that he had seen my son-in-law at the Ford dealership on Spears Road on the weekend. Said he'd been in the financing office for a good while. "Congratulations must be in order," my neighbor said, laughing. I told him that, young people these days, you couldn't keep up. I brought the bins in and sat down on the front step for a moment. The following morning I drove to the dealership. I had bought my last 2 vehicles there. The sales manager recognized me and shook my hand. I told him I'd heard my son-in-law had been in over the weekend, that I wanted to know what he'd bought so I could get him a detail package as a housewarming gift. They were finalizing a condo purchase. I said, "Big week." The sales manager smiled and pulled up the file without hesitation. F-150 Lariat. Black. My son-in-law had put down $30,000 cash for the deposit and financed the rest. The truck had left the lot on Saturday afternoon. I thanked him, drove home, and sat in my driveway for several minutes. $30,000 in cash. 2 days after I returned from Muskoka, my son-in-law was a project coordinator at a mid-sized construction firm in Burlington. His salary was somewhere around $70,000 a year before tax. I had co-signed their mortgage 4 years ago and had seen his income documentation. $30,000 in cash was not something a person at that income level produced in a weekend. Not legally. I went inside and updated the spreadsheet. That evening my daughter came by to check on me. She brought soup she hadn't made herself. It was from the Korean place on Lakeshore that she knew I liked. She was warm and attentive in the way that felt genuine, because with her it usually was. I asked her how things were going. She said things were actually really exciting. She had news. She and her husband were putting an offer in on a condo in Bronte. Brand new build, 2 bedrooms, rooftop terrace. She said the pre-construction price was $840,000, and that they had managed to save more than she expected over the past year. Plus her husband had received a bonus. I asked her which project the bonus came from. She named one I knew had been canceled mid-year. I nodded and said that was wonderful, that the Bronte corridor was a smart investment. She hugged me on her way out. I watched her cross the yard back to her house. My son-in-law met her at the door. I could see them through the kitchen window, animated, happy, building a life on a foundation that didn't belong to them. I called a solicitor the next morning. A woman I had been referred to years ago by a colleague, the kind of lawyer who did not waste time on unnecessary sentiment. I told her what I had and what I didn't have. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Criminal prosecution without a confession or forensic evidence is nearly impossible in cases of this nature, but there are legal instruments available to someone in my position that most people never think to use. She told me to come in on Friday. Her office was on a side street in downtown Oakville, above a bookshop. She had a whiteboard on one wall and a printer that never stopped running. She spread 4 documents across the table. Ontario's Municipal Act, she explained, allows any party to purchase tax arrears certificates on properties where the owner has failed to pay property taxes. The municipality issues these certificates at public auction. The buyer earns interest on the debt 5% per annum under current municipal rates. And if the arrears remain unpaid, the buyer can ultimately apply for a tax deed, which vests ownership of the property in them. She told me to look up the property tax records for my son-in-law's address. I had already looked. He owed 2 years of arrears on the house next door to mine, the house I had helped them purchase. He had not paid property taxes since the year after they moved in. The total owing, with penalties, was $9,430. The municipality had sent notices. He had not responded. That's a hook, she said simply. It would take time, she added. Months. But everything would be legal. Everything would be documented. And he would not know who owned the debt until I wanted him to know. I told her to set it up. She recommended we use a numbered company, a simple Ontario corporation, so that my name would not appear on any public documents until I chose to reveal it. She had a standard incorporation on file that took 3 days to establish. I signed the paperwork that afternoon. The retainer was $2,500. I wrote the check without hesitation. The following week I returned home and resumed my routine with deliberate care. I told my daughter I had decided to let the police matter go. The constable had been right, these things were hard to prove, and I didn't want to damage my relationship with her over a suspicion. She looked relieved in a way that she tried to hide and did not quite manage. My son-in-law came by 2 days later while I was grilling on the back deck and said he admired how I was handling everything. He accepted a beer. He stood in my backyard wearing a jacket that cost more than my first car and told me I was a class act. I thanked him. The week after that, my solicitor confirmed the numbered company had successfully purchased my son-in-law's tax arrears certificate. I was now his creditor. He owed me $9,430 plus accruing interest. He did not know it yet. I began the second phase the following Monday. The Canada Revenue Agency operates a tip line, the Informant Leads program, that allows any person to report suspected unreported income or tax fraud. The reporting is anonymous. The form is available online. I filled it in with the precision I had applied to tax returns for nearly 4 decades. I documented the dates, the amounts, the vehicle purchase, the property transaction, the salary I knew he earned. I noted that a deposit of not less than $30,000 cash had been used on a vehicle purchase in late September, and a further sum consistent with a condo down payment had been confirmed by my daughter directly. I noted that no legitimate income source existed to explain this cash given his documented employment income. I submitted the form and received a confirmation number, which I recorded in my file. Then I waited. Waiting is the hardest part of any long-term strategy. I had told clients that for decades. I had never had to live it this personally. I continued driving my daughter to her appointments when she asked, continued joining them for Sunday dinners occasionally, continued performing the role of the quiet, forgiving father who had moved past his loss. My son-in-law grew comfortable. I watched him add a second vehicle, a used Jeep, for my daughter in November. I watched them post photographs from a condo sales event in Bronte. I watched them make their plans on top of my savings and tell themselves they had earned it. 6 weeks after I submitted the CRA report, my daughter called me on a Wednesday evening. She sounded strained. She said her husband had received something in the mail from the CRA, an inquiry about unreported income related to cash transactions from earlier in the year. He needed to provide documentation within 21 days. She said it must be a mistake. She said these things happened randomly sometimes. I said yes. I had heard that. I said it sounded stressful and that he should probably get an accountant. She said they already had, and that the initial consultation had cost $800 and the full engagement would likely run several thousand. I expressed sympathy. I said I hoped it resolved quickly. 3 days later, I called a forensic accountant I had worked alongside on a fraud matter years ago, now retired from his firm but available for private work. I asked him to prepare a written analysis of the public financial records, the vehicle financing documents, the property application filed with the condo developer, the tax arrears history set against the known employment income. He delivered the report in 11 days. It was 14 pages. The summary was 4 sentences. There was no legitimate, documented source for the cash transactions in question. The amounts were inconsistent with the subject's known income by a factor of 3. The timing aligned precisely with the reported theft. The probability of an innocent explanation was, in his professional opinion, negligible. I placed that report in a folder alongside my solicitor's incorporation documents, the CRA confirmation number, and my original spreadsheet. I put the folder in a new safe, different model, different room, combination known only to me. In December, my daughter stopped by without calling ahead. It was a Sunday afternoon, gray and cold. First, real cold of the season. She sat down at the kitchen table and I made tea, and she was quiet for longer than usual before she spoke. She said her husband had been difficult lately, distant, angry in a way she didn't understand. She said the CRA situation was worse than they'd originally thought. The agency had come back with a proposed assessment for back taxes and penalties on the unreported income. The total was somewhere around $22,000. They were disputing it, but the accountant had told them the dispute would likely fail without documentation they didn't have. I asked her if she knew where the money had come from. The condo down payment. The truck. She looked at her mug for a long time. She said she had believed him when he said it was a bonus. She said she had not asked for paperwork. She said she had wanted it to be true. I told her I understood that. I said that wanting something to be true was human. I said that choosing not to ask questions because the answers might be inconvenient was something different. She started to cry. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't known. Not really. Not for certain. I told her that I believed her, and I told her that I had known since the Monday I came home from Muskoka. I told her that justice was in progress, and that it did not require her participation, only her patience. She left without finishing her tea. I heard her talking in an urgent voice to her husband through their kitchen window for a long time that evening, in January. My solicitor sent the formal notice. The numbered company, my company, was demanding payment in full of the tax arrears plus accumulated interest and fees. The total had grown to $11,200 with the penalty additions. The notice was sent by registered mail, signature required. My son-in-law signed for it on a Thursday afternoon. My solicitor texted me the confirmation. That evening, my daughter called. She said a collection company she had never heard of was demanding over $11,000 from her husband for some old property tax debt. She said the timing was not a coincidence. She said she knew it was me. Her voice had moved past hurt into something colder, and I respected her for that even as it cost me something to hear it. I told her the debt was real and legally owed. I told her her husband had not paid property taxes on their home for 2 years. I asked her if she had known that. She had not. Another thing he had not told her. I said I was sorry she was only finding out now. I told her he had until the end of February to pay in full. She said they couldn't pay it. The CRA assessment had already taken everything they had set aside. She said they were barely covering the mortgage. I told her I was sorry about that. She hung up. My son-in-law came to my door on a Saturday morning in February. I saw him coming up the front walk from the study window fast, jaw set, a piece of paper crumpled in one hand. I stood up and walked to the door and opened it before he could knock. He held up the notice. He said I was behind this. He said this was harassment and that his lawyer had told him he had grounds for a civil action. I leaned against the door frame and waited for him to finish. When he had, I told him that I had purchased a legitimate debt at a public municipal auction, which was a right available to any Ontario resident. I told him that reporting suspected tax fraud to the CRA was a right available to any Canadian citizen. I told him that he owed $11,200 and that the end of February was 3 weeks away. He told me I couldn't prove anything. He said it loudly enough that I could see my neighbor across the street pausing on his driveway to watch. I told him that I hadn't needed proof to build a case, I had needed documents, and I had them. I told him that everything I had done was legal, documented, and defensible. I told him that he had until the end of the month. He asked me what I wanted from him. He said he would pay me back. All of it. $220,000 plus the jewelry. He would get a line of credit. He would find a way. I asked him who would lend money to a man with a CRA assessment outstanding, an underwater vehicle loan, and a mortgage he was struggling to service. He didn't answer. I told him the end of February was the deadline and closed the door. I called my solicitor and told her what had happened. She told me to expect a letter from his lawyer within the week. It arrived in 4 days, a 3-page letter arguing targeted harassment, bad faith debt collection, and emotional distress. My solicitor read it and wrote back in 6 paragraphs, citing the specific provisions of the Municipal Act, the CRA Informant Leads Program Statute, and 3 Ontario court decisions on the legal purchase of tax arrears. She concluded by noting that her client welcomed any legal challenge at any time. His lawyer did not write again. The end of February came. No payment. I instructed my solicitor to begin the tax sale process. In March, my daughter came by one last time. She looked like she had not been sleeping. She sat at the same kitchen table, and she told me she had asked her husband directly, for the first time, using the word she had been avoiding. She had asked him if he had stolen from me. He had cried and told her he had borrowed it without permission, that he had planned to repay it before I noticed, that the opportunity had come up so suddenly and he had panicked and made a terrible decision. She had asked him how a person borrows $200,000 from a safe without permission and considers it a loan. He had not had an answer. She told me she was leaving him. She said it quietly and without drama, the way people announce decisions they have already lived with for weeks. She asked me if there was anything I could do to stop the tax sale, if once she was out of the marriage there was any path forward that didn't involve losing the house entirely. I told her the house was in both their names and that the tax arrears certificate applied to the property regardless of who occupied it. I told her that if she and I were going to have any relationship going forward, it would begin with honesty about what she had known and when. She stayed for 2 hours. We talked. Some of it was painful in the way that conversations about complicity always are when the person you're talking to is someone you love. She moved out in late March. He stayed in the house. The tax sale process in Ontario requires formal notice, a redemption period, and ultimately an application to the municipality for a tax deed if the arrears are not paid. My solicitor managed the timeline with the precision I had come to expect from her. My son-in-law made one final attempt at payment. He called my solicitor's office in April and offered $6,000, everything he claimed he could access. She relayed the offer. I declined it. He had had months. He had used them on lawyers and negotiations and delays, and every available mechanism except the one that would have resolved the matter, which was paying what he owed. The redemption period expired on a Thursday in May. My solicitor filed the application for the tax deed the following Monday. He called me the night before the deed was finalized. I recognized the number and answered. He was not angry this time. He was quiet in the way people get when they have run out of moves and know it. He asked me if any version of this ended with him keeping the house. I told him no. He asked me if there was anything he could do or say. I told him he could have paid his taxes. I told him he could have not stolen from his family. He was silent for a moment, and then he said he was sorry. He said it like he meant it, which was interesting, because I believe that by then, he probably did. I told him I accepted his apology and that it changed nothing about the outcome. Then I ended the call. The deed transferred in May. The property, a semi-detached on a quiet street in Oakville, purchased 4 years ago with my help, renovated over 2 years with his stolen capital, decorated with furniture and appliances bought at my expense without my knowledge, became mine by operation of law. I listed it through a local brokerage in June at $980,000. A couple in their early 40s, moving from Etobicoke, put in an offer the second week. They had 2 kids and a dog, and they asked the agent if the neighborhood was quiet. She told them it was. They accepted counter at $965,000, and the deal closed in July with the standard Ontario 30-day period. I sat in my study the evening after the closing and opened the spreadsheet I had started in October. I updated the final figures. The money I had lost. The money I had recovered through the property sale. Minus my solicitor's fees. Minus the forensic accountant. Minus carrying costs. The net was not a full recovery. I had lost approximately $90,000 in the final accounting, when you set the proceeds against everything that had been taken. The jewelry was gone and would not come back. I typed a note at the bottom of the spreadsheet. Could have accepted this loss. Chose not to. Would choose the same again. Through my study window, I could see the lights on in the house next door. The new owners were moving boxes. The dog ran through the backyard twice. The wife stood on the back step drinking something from a thermos and looking at the yard with the particular satisfaction of someone standing on ground that finally belongs to them. I watched her for a moment. Then I closed the laptop, turned off the desk lamp, and went to make dinner. Justice is not a loud thing. It doesn't knock on your door with declarations. It simply arrives, document by document, deadline by deadline, until one evening the spreadsheet is closed and the house is sold. And the person who believed you were too old or too trusting or too defeated to pursue the truth is sitting in a motel room somewhere off the QEW trying to explain to a credit counselor why every door is closed. I had spent 38 years helping people protect what they'd built. In the end, the skills that served me best were the ones I'd never thought I'd need to turn on my own family. But I had. And the thing about a life spent following numbers is this. The trail always ends somewhere. You just have to be patient enough to walk it to the finish. If this story meant something to you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. The next story is ready. Whenever you are, just click the box on the left. Thank you for being here.